envelope that had a pending like custody order in it. And then a few days later, when I showed up in court, I found out that they had filed for emergency custody, stating that I left my daughter on their doorstep and they didn't know how to get in touch with me or where to find me. After that, the judge gave them full custody with no way of getting my daughter back, because he felt more comfortable with her being in a two-parent home than with a single parent who didn't have a real job. And at that time, I was a waitress. It took me 9 years to get her back.
I do believe that not all cases should be the way they are treated, especially when certain parents go through the first domestic violence. In my case, things are being used against us that are not true, and there's no way we can prove our point because the CFS doesn't listen to you. They don't help you. They really don't help you at all. It's really you're on your own in this world with the CFS. It's very stressful, very frustrating, and at the end of the day, they don't know what they're doing to those families. I speak for myself personally. I believe my son is going through something that he shouldn't be going through. Just because he's always been with me, I've always been with him. His dad's always been there for him, but he's not the perfect dad. We're not the perfect parents, but we always have taken care of our kid. I strongly believe that DCFS should consider the fact that when it's your first domestic violence ever after so many years dating with this partner, like in my case, been 17 years, they shouldn't be removing the kids, because not only they separate families, it's like we go through a trauma because we don't know when we're going to see each other again. We don't know when we're going to speak to each other again. Our kids are left behind, like wondering what happened or wondering if they did something wrong when it's not the case. It's just how DCFS takes it and how our voices are not being heard.
In 2016, I gave birth to a beautiful little girl. The hospital drug tested my child and I without my consent and called.
You want to do something about it.
Herschel Walker faced a decision about whether to do something about the racial injustices in Wrightsville. Here's track coach Tom Jordan.
Called team meet. I said, look guys, so you can't get in shape for a track meet. Marching, you got to run. Practice is at 3 o'clock, I don't tolerate missing.
More than a dozen of Walker's teammates quit the track team. Walker did not.
And my parents told me to do what's right. There's no calling right or wrong.
Walker didn't say anything publicly about the protests, reflecting on his decision years later, again in an interview with Killer Mike.
What has happened if I went the other side? If I went that side, where would I be at today? Because right now I got an opportunity. I can get a seat at the table.
Now, that seat at the table may be in the U.S. Senate.
His political viewpoints and his rejection of race as a consideration does not represent African American audiences. It is, however, the perspective of the majority of working class white voters in the state of Georgia.
Historian Leah Wright-Rigueur says these views aren't an anomaly, so they shouldn't be ignored, especially when they're coming from a candidate on the cusp of immense influence. These two candidates have laid out conflicting descriptions of the country's current divisions. Here's Herschel Walker.
We're not a racist country. The United States of America is the greatest country in the world today, and it's time that we get leaders in Washington that know that.
This is Raphael Warnock.
We elected Georgia's first African-American Jewish senator, and hours later, the Capitol was assaulted. We see in just a few precious hours the tension very much alive in the soul of America. And the question before all of us at every moment is, what will we do to push us in the right direction?
Warnock and Walker's lives took them in two different directions. Georgia voters will soon choose which candidate they want to follow. For NPR News, I'm Sam Greenblatt in Atlanta.
This is NPR News. You're listening to WAMU 88.5. I'm Tamika Smith. Coming up at 6 on Marketplace, in the wake of Hurricane Ian, many Floridians have to deal with both wind and flood damage. The cost of recovery in one Florida neighborhood is really high. You'll hear more about that story. Plus, airfares were up 43% for the year ending in September. You'll get a look at what's behind the rise and whether ticket prices could fall anytime soon, especially since the holidays are coming up. That's Marketplace. It starts in about 30 minutes.
Support for WAMU comes from Cox, providing connections for everyone at home with their panoramic Wi-Fi gateway, which connects up to 6 devices. Learn more at Cox.com. NCTA, America's cable industry, working to deliver high-speed internet and opportunity to every corner of America. Details at ncta.com.
Light rain, about 70 degrees now in the nation's capital. Temperatures cooling down into the 60s. More on that forecast straight ahead.
It's All Things Considered. From NPR News, I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Sasha Pfeiffer. Some top Latina actresses, directors, and producers are pushing for more representation in Hollywood.
I don't think there's studios and networks evil plotting in these offices going, let's not hire women and let's not hire Latinos. I think they just unconsciously hire who looks like them.
No news.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. Almost 5 years after the murders of 17 people at a Florida high school, a jury today recommended life in prison without parole for Parkland shooter Nicholas Cruz. A sentence of death would have required a unanimous decision among the 12 jurors. In this case, at least one juror held out. Several family members shook their heads in disbelief as the verdict became clear. Tony Montalto lost his 14-year-old daughter during the rampage at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
I haven't heard one of our families complain about the case they put on. They were factual. They were realistic. Their rebuttal was excellent. I just think people forget what facts are these days.
The defense had argued that there were mitigating factors. Mental health problems drove Cruz's actions that day. Cruz had already pleaded guilty to the Valentine's Day shooting and will spend the rest of his life in prison. Authorities in New York are asking a court to intervene to block former President Donald Trump from hiding business assets. NPR's Ilya Meritz reports New York's Attorney General is concerned Trump may be trying to shield his assets should he lose a lawsuit against him.
In September, New York Attorney General Letitia James sued Donald Trump, the Trump Organization, and Trump's 3 eldest adult children, accusing them of a years-long fraud that involved lying about the value of their real estate holdings. That same day, a new Trump business entity was formed. AG James is concerned Trump may use that new business to shield some of his holdings should the state prevail in its lawsuit and win big dollar penalties. James is asking the judge to block Trump from moving assets without the court's approval and to appoint an independent monitor. Trump's attorney calls the motion a stunt and says her client has no intention of doing anything improper. Ilya Meritz, NPR News, New York.
Roaring back from steep losses earlier in the day, stocks finished higher on Wall Street. This is NPR. Judges on India's Supreme Court say they've been unable to agree on a verdict in one of the country's most closely watched legal cases. It has to do with the issue of Muslim headscarves in public schools. NPR's Lauren Freyer reports from Mumbai.
Earlier this year, a group of Muslim girls in southern India sued the country's Hindu nationalist government over the right to wear the hijab in public school classrooms. They'd been told to take theirs off or stay home from school. Their case went to India's Supreme Court, and after months of deliberations, judges have announced the result. But they called it a split verdict. Basically, they couldn't agree among themselves. So a ban on headscarves in classrooms in the plaintiff's home state of Karnataka will remain in effect, and their legal case will now be delayed for weeks or months while the Chief Justice of India weighs what to do. Lauren Freyer, NPR News, Mumbai.
Here in the U.S., long-term mortgage rates have reached their highest level in more than 2 decades as the Fed promises more rate hikes to tamp down inflation. Mortgage buyer Freddie Mac